Welcome, everyone, to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We have a new author, Lloyd Jeffries, and the guest interviewer today is Burke Allen from Allen Media Strategies. So, Burke, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Big Time Talker podcast and a special simulcast with our friends from Zoom into Books and Headline Books, the independent publisher of the year, as we talk to some of the hottest authors in the world. And we're on a whole bunch of platforms. You can get our Big Time Talker podcast at Spotify, download at iHeart. And any of those podcast platforms. We have brand new shows every Tuesday, but because of the simulcast, we're also live and streaming worldwide on YouTube and on Facebook Live. So if you're watching us now on Facebook Live from anywhere on the planet, you can send in your questions and comments for our guest author today. If you are a fan of page turners, if you like thrills and chills in your books, the multi-award-winning author Lloyd Jeffries is hanging out with us to talk about the business of books today. And the show is brought to you by SpeakerMatch.com, the world's largest online virtual speakers bureau. So, Lloyd, on behalf of our friends at Headline Books and the Big Time Talker podcast, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Burke. I'm super stoked to be here.
I want to get right into these books. The book series is the Ages of Malice. And the first two books are out. The third one is on the way. And there's a lot that happens in these books. But if you run into somebody and they find out that you're the Lloyd Jeffries, you're the guy that's written all these books that have won all these awards, and they say, hey, I don't know your stuff. What's it about? How do you describe what it's about? Because it's a lot. You got a lot happening.
Yeah, boy, I could talk forever on that, right? But what it's about is there's this down on his luck reporter named Emery Merrick. I know, sounds like the normal trope, right? But he has some stuff happens to him, loses his reputation, his career, his wife, everything. He's at rock bottom. He's fixing to, end it all. And then there's a knock on the door where this world famous billionaire named Thaddeus Drake chooses him to write his biography. So Emery sees that as a chance to get his life back. And then what ensues is he finds out that Thaddeus Drake is actually Cain from Cain and Abel of the Bible, right, that had killed his brother and was banished to wander the earth forever. But now Cain, or Thaddeus Drake, runs this secret society that basically controls every aspect of the world. And so as Emery gets drawn more and more into that, it's just sort of about that adventure and the rise of the Antichrist. And I hit everything from there, I think.
How many books do you foresee in this series to tell this whole story? Will it be like the Left Behind series that has many, many books, or do you have any idea yet where it's all?
I'm thinking 7 or 8. I don't have an exact number because, I'm weaving a tapestry. There's a lot that goes into this. I'm trying to hit religion, spirituality. I'm hitting action, romance, mystery, thriller. And I, based on my awards, I've pulled all that off pretty well. I'm thinking 7 or 8. The one thing I know for sure is this series ends. There is a solid ending to this. I do not plan on having this go on forever. I've got so much other things I want to write about.
If you want to check out Lloyd Jeffries, go to lloydjeffries.com. The book's, of course, available at Amazon. You can ask for them at your favorite bookstore as well. So when you sat down to start writing this first book, is it something where you had all these ideas swirling around in your head and they just needed to come out? Or, you've been compared to people like Dan Brown and Stephen King and some pretty Dean Koontz, some pretty high cotton. So when you sat down to do this first one, was it just that? Did it just all come flying out of the fingers?
No, it didn't. It took me 12 years. I had the idea hit me originally like a lightning bolt. And so I thought originally that this story was going to be about Cain. But the first thing I had to do was to learn how to write well, which, as Stephen King points out, that is a craft. Right. And it took me all that time. But then when I got to the point where I was going, holy moly, this isn't about Cain. This is the story of Emery. And once I saw that, then the whole series sort of took shape from there and became something really just amazing.
One of the things I think is interesting is I read up on you and learned more about you, and we had an opportunity to meet up at the Reader's Favorite Awards, one of those awards that you won. And by the way, congratulations on that and all your other awards. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
Um, I thought it was fascinating that your background is not the background that one might think of as somebody who would write this kind of stuff, would write thrillers. I mean, you've got this background where you served in the military and there was some special operations stuff that you really don't like to get into and can't get into. But it's about as far away from writing these thrilling post-apocalyptic books as anything in the world. So where did the original idea that 12, 13 years ago germinate from? Where did that come from?
I think it came from my whole life. I was raised on church benches, and I was always sitting there as a child going like, some of this doesn't make sense. I've got some questions, you guys. And when I would ask those questions, they would tell me, well, it's about faith and but they never really answered the question for my soul. And then this idea came sailing, and it really opened up the door so I could explore all of that and squeeze it and get the juice out of it and say, man, there's got to be more. There's got to be more than what I'm being told. And it has to fit into the modern day. It's got to make sense on every level. And so as I've worked, what am I at, a decade and a half of going through this, I have put that together, and it's just super exciting because there's so much to explore there, and it's something, as you can probably tell, I love talking about this. I love debating this. This stuff is not personal to me. I love these ideas, and when I see people and the way that they respond to God or religion, I find those to be two different things, but they're both equally fascinating to me.
Now, what do you mean when you say that the God and religion are two separate entities?
Yeah, and you'd find that in a line of one of my books, that religion is a construct of man and therefore flawed, right? And you can look back through the history of that and find just numerous stories that will make you go, huh, that doesn't make sense. But God is universal. I have been all over the world. When I was in Afghanistan, I saw these Afghanis that their God was huge. Their God was omnipotent, right? I see that in just Eastern philosophies. I think that the truth is the truth, no matter where you find it. And as we're human, we're prone to error. And I think that sort of muddies the water between, does God really care about me? Does God really care about you? And so I think there's a huge difference between the concept of a caring God and religion.
Lloyd Jeffries, our guest today on the Big Time Talker podcast. Also, our Facebook Live with our friends from Zoom Into Books and Headline Books. We're talking about his Ages of Malice series, a portion of Malice. The first book won a ton of awards. He's on the third book now, is about to come out. As a kid growing up in what I'm assuming you didn't say it, but assuming the Christian church, you had lots of questions. I want to make sure from my reading of these books that the people who are watching or listening realize these are not religious books, though. These are not Christian books. These are page turners.
Yeah, they are. These are thrillers, and they're about this guy that's just completely over his head, where he's walking into this world for purely selfish reasons, and then he finds out that there's this massive, deep state society, and he's striving against that, and the powers of good and the powers of evil are starting to align, per prophecy. Per any monotheistic religion, you can find these things. I didn't write these books to be religious books. I wrote these to change an outdated conversation about, things that Virgil brought up, or Dante, when they're talking about, the planes of hell and the planes of heaven. I'm like, no, I want that to feel real. I want that to hit me in my heart and hit me in my mind. And those two have to come together. And, when I meet my readers, that's what they tell me. They're like, oh, man, I was blown away. The best compliment I got this week was somebody that was like, man, this is something new, and that's super hard to find right now. And I was like, yeah, all right, I did
Played, well
it.
played. Did you, as a kid, and then as a guy in the military, were you a big reader? And maybe you can correct me on this, but a lot of my friends who've served, especially in war zones, have told me that it's a whole lot of short burst of
Yeah.
intense, I'm scared to death action, followed by days of boredom and looking for anything to read, like cereal boxes. So were you a big reader as a kid and then as a military guy?
Yeah, as a kid, I grew up in a trailer park and not the best of circumstances, but I used to be able to beg, borrow, steal any book, any comic book, anything that was written. I mean, if it came from a cereal box, I would read it. And I had this little closet I would hide in, and I would just read everything I get my hands on. But then when I was in the military, we were on these deployments. I became the guy that was writing those stories. I would write these stories and I'd give them to my friends. I'd include all of us in there and they'd be funny, like, war heroes singing show tunes while they're, just absurd, crazy stuff. But you know what it did? It broke the boredom, but it brought everybody together in sort of a common point of joy, which is the power of reading, right? I get called an author all the time. I consider myself a storyteller. I want a good story, man. I don't care about the tropes or the genres. I want a good story when I read.
Are these stories, and I appreciate the delineation there. You're an author, but really you're a storyteller. So would you say that these stories are going to be provocative to some people? In today's world, it's kind of hard not to get people all bent out of shape, and it's pretty easy to do when you talk about religion. So are these provocative books, you think?
They are. They're absolutely provocative. I wrote them to be provocative. However, I do not disparage any religion. I have the greatest respect for religion. If you read my books, you'll see that I don't disparage religion. That's not what this is about. I want to provoke thought. And probably one of my greatest comments that I get in reviews is thought provoking. I want you to look at your paradigms and go, well, this is all the stuff that I've been taught. Is it true? Does it pass what we call in the military the chuckle test, right? Does it pass the chuckle test? Can I look at this and it resonates and makes me really think outside the box on how I live every day, how I treat every human that I encounter every day, how I treat my family, how I process the smell of a rose or rain on my face. I mean, it's an amazing thing to be able to bring that out in people and say, hey, you really made me think. And I'm like, oh yeah, all right. That's my goal. That's what I set out to do.
One of the things that I thought was cool as I started to dig into the first book in the series, A Portion of Malice, is it's one of those great global stories. It's one of the things that as a kid make me love those James Bond movies that would take me to places that I couldn't even imagine growing up in Appalachia. And your books do that. I mean, you're in London, you're in Vatican City, Dubai, Jerusalem, of course, Czechoslovakia. Did your world travels influence the way you wrote this sort of international thriller?
They did, absolutely. When throughout the military, I've been to many places, but the first time I was in a foreign country, I couldn't believe it. I
Yeah.
was just stunned. And then every country has had its own flavor since then. But it really worked as a nice way to harmonize Kane, this guy that has been around since the beginning of time. And he doesn't look at the world as a set of countries or a set of cities. He looks at it as it's one big city. This is his whole map. And so for him, he bounces around. He likes to go to these different places because he is acting on the world stage, even as Thaddeus Drake, his alter ego, being a peacemaker. He goes in and does all this kind of stuff. Then it gets a little, it gets a little, I guess, sinister as you start to see that what Thaddeus Drake is really up to.
Lloyd Jeffries, our guest today. Visit him online at lloydjeffries.com. You can sign up for his newsletter and get some free exclusive content from Lloyd. The new book is due anytime now, and it's the third book in his Ages of Malice series. So you just talked about sinister, and part of these stories suggest this powerful group of guys that are sort of operating in secrecy. And we hear lots of political commentary in the real world today about deep states. And here it is in your book. You've got these, rich guys, powerful guys, and they're in that conspiracy theory world. So two-part question. In the real world, in your mind, do these things exist? Is there a deep state? And secondarily, why do you think so many storytellers use that premise? It's in books, it's in movies, of these conspiracy theories in the deep state. So are they real? And whether they are not, why do you think that they make it into so much popular culture?
Well, yeah, that's a super good question. I'm not sure that I can really answer, but I can give you something to consider.
Okay.
If you are part of a corporation, there is some deep state there, just within the confines of that corporation, right? There's the guys that are behind the scenes that have been pulling all the strings and doing that. And if you are part of the NFL, part of the, professional sports, anything that has a lot of money, just a ton of money, you have to go, well, there's going to be corruption there, and people want to control that. So if you take that and pull it out and look around, just something like our government, something like world government and world politics, and you sit here a lot as like a normal guy, and you sit there and you chuckle and you go, how on earth did that happen? And I go, man, it's ludicrous to believe it is. Remember how we never thought there were UFOs? It's ludicrous to believe that there is not a deep state.
So in your mind, you mentioned sports, for example. It is plausible that the occasional Major League Baseball game gets thrown, that the occasional NFL game comes down to, I don't know, the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl with the most powerful power couple in the world getting all that camera time. You think there's really something to that? It's not just all kismet that comes together.
Yes, I don't think any of that is accidental. I don't think that it's ever accidental why teams rise to the top for a few years and then they kind of sink. And I know what they tell us about, well, we're rebuilding and all of that kind of stuff. I just go, wait a minute, it's pretty easy. You take a system that has that much money and that much popularity, you're going to have corruption there. And from the corruption, everything flows. And that stuff all flows down to me when I go to a store and just try to buy a tomato. Right? And how that tomato has gotten to market and the price that I'm paying for that tomato. But as I look through the world, I go, man, this is getting out of hands. Everything that I've written in my books could be happening right this second. And that's what my readers tell me. They see characters and they go like, I saw Longinus at my doctor's office. I saw Kane on TV as a politician from here, right? All I'm doing is just, connecting some pretty obvious dots to say, wait a minute. And, the thing about it is I don't really care about a deep state. What I care about is how I react to those around me and how I treat those things that are important to me. But quick tip, I've never found anything that was important to me that could be burnt with a match, right? Everything that is important I have found in my life is intangible. Everything else, where I'm sitting, anything that I have, I go, you can put pressure on that, squeeze it tight, man. But when it comes down to it, here's the thing. I've done emergency medicine for decades. I've seen many, many people die. I've sat there holding the hands of people as they passed away. Not one of them has asked for more money or a bigger house or a better car. But every one of them has said, where's my family? Where's my daughter? Where's my son? Where's my wife? And that is power. That's what we need. We need the family values to come in here and to look at everything and to say, okay, it's not all about money. You're missing the point, guys.
Lloyd Jeffries is our guest today, and man, we got to get you out there running for office. But then you'd have to stop writing these books. And I want to read the whole series, so we can't have it. LloydJeffries.com is the website. The books are available at Amazon.com as well, and you ask for them at bookstores. He's a multi-award-winning author. Hey, I want to ask you a little bit about the craft of writing, if we can get into it. You talked about Stephen King, as an inspiration in terms of your writing style, and being a voracious reader, helping to make you a great writer. These books, as we talked about, they're very global, Lloyd. You're in all these different places, but you also are toggling in time, between times and today. So talk to me about the research that you go into for a fiction novel like this. It's different, I guess, if you're writing a historical book than if you're writing a fiction novel, because in theory, you could make it all up. But as I read your stuff, it seems very well researched. So for the aspiring writers out there and for the guys who geek on history like me, talk me through that research that you did for these books.
Oh yeah, tons of research. I believe that, and if you just look at military history, you'll see how the past informs the present. But I think that we get lost thinking that maybe our 70 or 80 years is all of history. And when you go back and start looking at things, you're going to say, wow, this has happened before. This is kind of a tried and true technique. And so every book that I write, it gets weeks of research before a single word's ever written. I have an idea and I go, how does that tie into this? And I want to tie these things into actual events, right? I want, it would be implausible to have Cain, in Portion of Malice, my sort of main bad guy. It would be implausible to think that he didn't have anything to do with history. He had everything to do with history. That's how Exjasi has become so powerful now. So yeah, the research is key to everything. It's what ties the facts and makes things believable.
And the research itself, is it internet-based? Is it book-based? Do you set out with a list of questions you want to get answered? Take me into that minutia a little bit.
Yeah, okay. So, it's like the research has been going on my whole life. Questions that I've had when I was a kid, but I'm interested. At one point in my life, I sat down and I read every religious text I could get my hands on. I found a lot of commonalities there. And so I will, on my bookshelf and, where I keep all my research stuff, you'll see where I'm researching into Muslim history and what they believe. I'm researching what the Buddhists are up to, but I'm also researching like what was Constantine the Great doing, or what happened during the American Reconstruction after the Civil War. I was just researching that yesterday, reading about that. Like, it is endlessly fascinating because really it's a rewind of us. It's like watching old videos of Christmas when you were a kid, but you can go back hundreds of years and look at this and go, this informs everything today. We can't ignore this, but we often do because we can have a phone in front of our face. Not that I'm not knocking that. I have a phone in front of my face most of the time, but usually I'm digging into weird stuff, right?
So you go way down the rabbit hole when you're doing the research then.
Yeah, as far as I can. And then, I'll take 3 or 4 things and they will just click where I'm like, wow. So this influenced this, which then made this happen. And then suddenly everything makes sense. And you go, oh, wait, what a great tie-in. And then I can bring that up and make it something fascinating, and I could give you examples of that from the book. But yeah, that's how I do it. I dig in, research. If you're a writer, research will save you. When you're stuck, go and do more research. It will save you every time. It can't fail.
And do you then, because this is a big, long series, and you're in book 3 now, is about to come out writing book 4. Do you do an outline of the book? Do you do a chapter outline? Do you begin with the end in mind? How does that piece work for you?
Yeah, I call that putting the bones on it. I get all my research and I have stacks and stacks of legal pads, right? Because I'm kind of old school like that. So I'm going through my legal pads and I'm writing, no, this is not a bad idea. And oh, this might be good. And oh, this is something I found. I was reading about Rasputin the other day and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And so I just kind of write these things and I get an idea and I go, okay, put this up there, and before you know it, I have 10, 12 different ideas about where I want to go. And then that's when I start writing, because when I start writing, my characters will take me places I don't want to go, right? They do things where I'm just completely like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's where we're going. And wow, but that makes the story unpredictable. That's another thing I get back feedback on all the time, that, wow, we cannot predict what's happening next in this story. Yeah, that's because I'm not teasing it out to the nth degree. I just start to type and then my characters take me to cool places.
You have gotten so many awards and accolades, and as I read through the reviews on Amazon for A Portion of Malice, or the second book, A Measure of Rhyme, has a bunch of great reader reviews too. Let me flip that on its side as a creative. If somebody reads your book and gives you a bad review, what does that do to you inside? Is it difficult to stomach? Do you shrug it off?
Thankfully, I haven't had many of those, but I don't mind if it's fair, right? You can't dig me on my writing. You're not going to ding me on my plot. You're not going to ding me on my characters, my action, my intelligence, any of that stuff. And I had one review that came back that was like, oh, I didn't appreciate the violence. And I was like, I don't write violent things, but sometimes I have to when I'm trying to say, here's how a Roman gladiator reacts to a situation, right?
Right.
So does it bother me? No. When I get like, I got a 3-star review once and I was reading it and I looked at it and I thought, oh, I could see that reader didn't really pick up on what I was trying to say. And so that informed me in the future when I'm looking at my work to say, oh, okay, am I really making this point strong enough where I want my reader to really absorb what it is that I'm getting at?
Lloyd Jeffries is our guest today on the Big Time Talker podcast. We're also simulcasting on Facebook Live all over the world. If you have a question or a comment for Lloyd, be sure to send it in. And the show will be on YouTube as well. Thanks to our partners at Zoom into Books, our friends at Headline Books. Thanks to Kathy Tietze and our whole staff there for letting us crash the party today. You revealed a couple of things in our conversation about your past, and I tread very gently in talking about it. You mentioned, you've done emergency medicine. I know that you'd serve with some special ops guys. You have a military background, and you shared that, you would share stories with those guys. Have you heard from any of the guys that you used to serve with now that the books are out there and they're, winning all these awards? And if so, I'm just curious as to what the guys you served with might say about the books now, because it's a whole different world you're in.
Yeah, and that's the thing, there'll be like, the thing I get the most probably is like, wow, who'd have thought you had that in you? You know? Who'd have thought that you were a poet? And I'm like, I'm not a poet, And but I think, they're like, oh, it probably took 2 or 3 months to write these. And it's like, wow, and I try to tell them, I'm like, dude, you have no idea the amount of work that goes into a novel. If I'm going to do something worth doing, then I'm going to do it right. And I think that they're sort of impressed by that, because they were like, oh, we saw this medic, and they certainly knew me on a personal level. But to be like, wow, this is what's running around in your head, and that's kind of fun to hear, because it keeps them off balance, and that's a tough thing to do.
You write pretty prolifically. You talked about this is maybe a 7 or 8 book series before you move on to the next thing. Do you sit down at your computer and like you don't move until you've written X number of words per day, or you stay there for a couple of hours every day? And the reason I ask is I read this fascinating story about John Grisham once, and he goes into his office in Charlottesville, Virginia, like every day, and he'll write for 4 hours, then go to lunch at his favorite little diner and come back and write in the afternoon. What is your method so that there is an end to the beginning?
Yeah. Well, right now, each book has developed in a different way. So right now I'm working on the fifth book in the series, which I don't have a name for, but I have other demands on my time, which has been made that challenging. So what I've done is I've made a list of different scenes. Like I don't know how these scenes tie together, where they're going, but what I do is I come and look at my list and I go, I'm writing a scene that involves Longinus and Emery in this, scenario. And then I write it. And then I'm like, okay, great. Let's put that in the bank and set it aside. At some point, if you write every day, you can get that stuff down and you go 80,000 words. Well, man, if you're writing 2,000 words a day, then you're knocking that out in 60 days. You would have a novel that just needs its polish and its prep.
So your process then is that you write it, you get it all out, and once it's all out, then you go back and do a pass and you clean it up and do the editing.
On this book.
So
On the one I'm working
on each of them, huh?
Yeah, so the second one, A Measure of Rhyme, and then the third one that's releasing soon called Embers of Shadow. When I wrote that, I thought it was a single book, and then I realized I had really a book and a half, about a book and three quarters. And then I went, oh, and it caused me to kind of redo it all and put it together, but it challenged the thought process. There are no tropes. It challenged what I could do. And you have to wrestle with that. You got to chew on it, man. You got to have sleepless nights. You're having dreams about it. And at some point it comes together. And that's how 2 and 3 worked. Book 1 took 12 years. Book 5, I haven't even put the bones on it yet because like I said, my time's been so um, fleeting that I have been able to just go, hey, I just want to get things on the page. And when I have the time, I can sit there and put the bones on it. And then I'll put the scenes together and the research and the art and the music and the literature and the action and the locales and the characters. And it just goes on and on. But I am creating a tapestry. And if you've ever seen one of those created, I was in Turkey watching one time them make a Turkish rug. And I went, wow. When it's done, you think, that probably wasn't that hard. But when you see it, you go, holy moly. But that informed the work that I do. I'm putting together a multi-layered tapestry here, and I'm very proud of it.
As well, you should be. The book series is called Ages of Malice. The first book, multi-award winner, Portion of Malice. The second one, A Measure of Rhyme. Those are both out now at lloydjeffries.com, Amazon. The new one is, man, I will tell you, Lloyd, when I look at these books and sort of how they sprawl across so many things, and yet you still make them interesting reads. I wonder if when you spit them out, is there a first reader there for you who gives you editing notes? Many publishers have editors and they send notes back. And if so, how you take those notes, right? Do you
Yeah.
go, no, this is the way I want it to be? Do you push back a lot?
Well, there's an old saying that says, when someone tells you what's wrong with your book, they're almost always right. When they tell you how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. Yeah, I have a fantastic editor, and she's been with me from my very first manuscript of Cain, which was horrible. But through these years, I've learned to, when I give her something, first of all, I give it to her as polished as I can give it to her.
Right.
When she brings it back, then her notes are gold, if nothing else, to consider everything. And then, of course, it'd be remiss not to mention my wife, who just will be like, I'm going to dig my heels in on this because this part of the story is bugging me. And I'm like, you're not creative. You don't know. But what I'll do is I'll take a couple of weeks and kick it around, and then I'll come around and going, she pushed me to do better, and it almost always meets the goal, which is the best end product I can produce, the very best story that we can put out.
Your books, they deal with this sort of apocalyptic theme. And I've always found it interesting that people are drawn to those stories. And I would be one of those guys. And I've never dug deep enough to figure out what it is internally that makes you fascinated by the apocalypse, by the end times, by disaster films. What
Yeah.
is it in our psyche that draws us to these things, these dark things, you think?
Yeah, I think it's a sense of awe that we're not the biggest thing. That, some hurricane, I live in Florida, man, we deal with hurricanes all the time.
Sure.
Some hurricane can come by and just wipe us out. And I think that's sort of something that gets in our mind, like, somebody against those odds. It's a safe place if you're in your den reading an apocalyptic story, because it's not raining fire outside. But what I'm doing with these books is I intend to, I'm going to reframe this conversation. I'm going to bring this in. I've heard about the end times since I was a child. I cut my teeth on church pews. I'm going to reframe this. We're going to go right through it. And I'm going to do it in a way that makes sense. And I win a lot of awards in supernatural, which I think is funny because somebody goes, "Oh, I almost got hit by a car the other day, but thank God I didn't." Like, God intervened. I'm like, well, that's supernatural. People are interested in the spear of destiny and the Antichrist and, super relics and the Holy Grail. They're interested in how all of that prophecy that seems so far-fetched can truly come to pass in the earth that we have today that's just driven by technology. I've done that with Ages of Malice.
You mentioned you have constraints on your time. You work in medicine, and you did that in the military. So I wonder how you sort of separate out these two worlds as this thriller writer. I mean, I'm imagining in my head here, it's almost like Clark Kent and Superman, right? You go and you put your super suit on and you start writing, and then you take it off and you head off to the office to do other things. But for a lot of people, it's not easy to put those things in different boxes. And I'm curious as to how you do that separation of, okay, I'm the professional medicine guy, I'm the thriller writer, and oh, by the way, I have a family I need to take care of, a wife and kid and dog as well. So do these things ever come together? How do you keep them separate?
Yeah, they certainly come together. They come together in my observation. I just look at everything from, if you have three people that all cut their thumb and need sutures, all three of them are going to react differently to that entire process of just getting some sutures in their thumb. And what's fascinating is everything that I think, the way I would react to that is completely different across the board. And so I find myself front and center of being a student in humanity. In the emergency department, you see people at their worst. I meet people, and within 5 seconds, they're telling me their worst stories.
Sure.
But what you get to see is humanity. You get to see character. You get to see, like, they're crumbling under that weight, or they're rising to the occasion. They're gripping their grief, or they are destroyed by it. And everything in between. Let me tell you, it has been an amazing. The theater of life has never disappointed me. It has been an amazing thing. Mostly horrific, but pretty amazing.
Do you record inspiration as it comes along? Back in the day, I used to have a notepad with a suction cup, and it stuck to the windshield of my Jeep. So if something came on, I had a little pen with string on it. I could write it down and make notes. I had these little stack of notes. Now, of course, I have the notes on my phone for, as you said, whenever you're in the middle of the theater of life and something comes along, it's an inspiration. How do you keep track of that stuff? Where do you save your notes?
Yeah, I've tried to record. And what happens is I generally forget that I recorded something. And then when I try to go back and find it, then I'm looking through other recording apps, it just gets stupid. What I do is I just use the notes on my phone. I just pull up notes and I write in what I can. Or sometimes, I'm an old guy, right? So sometimes you can talk to the phone and it will sort of record your voice, but not perfectly. And I like when I write that stuff, I want it to be, I need to be able to read it, know what I was talking about 4 months later. And so that's how I do it. I put it down on my phone, but I also like it. If you could just look around my office here, I have sticky notes everywhere, everywhere. I just live and die by the sticky note because they're so easy. If you're a writer, you can take a whole block, you can take 2 chapters and in an instant move them and change the entire course of your book. It's really an amazing thing. There's something to be said about the old school.
Lloyd Jeffries, our old school author today, multi-award winning author of the Ages of Malice series. This is our Big Time Talker podcast, also simulcast on Facebook Live and on YouTube. Thanks to our friends at Zoom into Books. So if you're listening to the podcast, you're not going to be able to see this, but Lloyd, for the folks who are watching online right now, could you hold up a cover of one of your books? Do you have anything on your desk?
Yeah.
All right. So this is the one that's out now, A Measure of Rhyme. And you
Yeah.
look at that, and that kind of screams, Dean Koontz, Stephen King. There's a portion of Malice. What authors inspire you? Like, who do you read and you go, wow, I really like that stuff?
That list is long and distinguished. When I first joined the military and I was doing all this training and everything, I had a Stephen King novel in my hand 24/7.
Yeah.
Before I joined the military, I was reading Dean Koontz books. Before that, I devoured Arthur Conan Doyle, complete works of Sherlock Holmes, just my favorite. Every Shakespeare work I could get my hand on, and trying to puzzle through there and go like, my God, this guy was next level. And Michael Crichton, I've torn through all his stuff. But then there's Aldous Huxley, I get into some eclectic stuff like E. Cummings and some of the just amazing poetry that he's written. And then, of course, there's the man himself, Charles Dickens. I just spend a lot of time going, man, I got to get back to my Dickens. I haven't read Great Expectations in a while, and I'm due, and that excites me. So all of those guys have influenced me, every one of them.
And the thing that they all have in common is they write, and I'll go back to that term again, great page turners.
Yeah.
It's not about some big esoteric plan. They're not being professorial and trying to teach you a lesson. It's all about the story.
It is. There's storytellers. When Michael Crichton is just an amazing. When you read The Stand by Stephen King and you go through that, and I remember reading that, I was maybe 19 or 20, and I just went, oh my God, like this is writing. You can do so much on a page. It opened to my eyes that there were no limits. There's no possibilities. You can write as big as you want. You'll never find an FBI agent or an ex-CIA agent as my main character or anything, because I go, well, that's been overdone. I want to write big. I want to change conversations, and I want to talk about things that, it's like a raindrop on a lake where the ripples just go on forever. I want to be able to adjust somebody's perspective just that much, not to get their money, not to get their accolade, but so in their life, they have adjusted that much and they go, man, that made a difference. They don't even have to remember my name. They just have to be like, I read this book and it changed the way I thought about things. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's why I'm here. That's why I do this.
When you write these books and you sit down with that goal in mind and a great story comes out the other side, it has to be very satisfying. And I know you said you don't do it for the awards, you do it for the readers. Do you remember the first time somebody came up to you after reading one of your books, somebody you didn't know, outside the friends and family circle, and they said something good? Do you remember what that felt like and that experience? And so I'd love for you to share it with me.
Yeah, I do. And it was actually somebody that I work in medicine with. And, and I don't, when I'm at work, I don't talk about my books. I don't, like, as far as they know, I'm just another medic, right? And so I had somebody come in and they had seen my picture on the cover, on the back copy. And they came up and actually they had Measure of Rhyme, this one. Yeah. Measure of Rhyme in the Wild. Right. It was a big thing because I went, Dana, I just saw a Measure of Rhyme in the Wild. They were shaking it and they went, blown away. And I was like, wow. And then I found out that person was an avid reader and just, and every now and again, it comes up where somebody will send me something going, hey, where's your third book? Where's your third book? We're dying. Where's your third book? And I'm like, I don't, nothing gets released until it is as perfect as I can make it. But man, does that, you go, wow. Somebody in Belgium sent an email and I was just like, Belgium?
How
Somebody
good.
read my book in Belgium. How fantastic.
You know, you talked about in your books, you know, you have this rich tapestry, and it's world building is what you're really doing. You're building a world, much like Stephen King did in The Stand, the book
Yeah.
that blew your mind when you were 20 years old. When you are world building like that, um, you have complete control. I've talked to a lot of authors who've had books that have been made into movies or television shows or limited series, and
Yeah.
you know, there's no greater marketing for a book than to have it become that. But many, probably most of the authors that I've talked to have been dissatisfied with the end result because it wasn't what was in their mind when they
Oh,
built that
yeah.
world. So let me ask you that question. You know, how do you feel about the possibility of somebody adapting one or more of these books into a series, into a movie, and you not necessarily having the final say on how your world is built?
Yeah, that you know, that's a tough question. I can tell you that when I go through reviews and when I get feedback from readers, one thing that they all say is cinematic.
Yeah.
And so it's certainly come up in those circles to be like, hey, you know, what about making movies and whatever? And then I go, you know what? I got to worry about today, man. Today is hard enough. I'm trying to finish. I want to write this series and I want it to be superlative.
Yeah.
Then what happens to it after that, like, you know, it worries me a little bit because I think that I have just made these grand characters that are going to be tough to emulate on the screen. But if anybody wants to know who the actors are that I would pick, I would go like, ah, I'd pick these guys, you know?
If you had the casting director hat on, you could do it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, then I do have to ask you, who in your mind's eye would be a good Emery, your lead character?
Oh, yeah. That is probably the toughest one. The guy that leaps to mind initially is John Hamm.
Oh yeah,
You've
okay, I
seen
can see
some of
that.
his work, yeah. But then again, I was looking at you know, Ed Norton Jr. And then I saw a movie with Robert Downey Jr. the other day. He was just such a fantastic actor. He even brings up a superhero movie. I mean, come on.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was going, yeah, somebody that can be beleaguered and get through all this stuff. You know, the thing that people say the most about Emery, they love him because he just keeps going. You know, he's trying to make sense of it all, and I think it really hits everybody in their heart to see that.
He doesn't give up. Lloyd Jeffries is our guest today. The book series is called The Ages of Malice. Book one, A Portion of Malice. Book two is A Measure of Rhyme. They're both out and available now at Amazon.com, bookstores everywhere, BarnesandNoble.com. Embers of Shadow is the next book in the series that will take you on a wild ride with Emery. Have you seen books that were made into movies? And you, I think it's a common thing where we go, the book was better, right? Stephen
Yes,
King's a great example of that.
great
Um,
example of that.
you know, where most of the time the book is better. I wonder if there are any movies that you thought were as good or better than the book.
I can think of one, The 13th Warrior. That was based on a book called Eaters of the Dead, a Michael Crichton novel. And had read Eaters of the Dead and I saw the 13th Warrior. I never put them together. You know, I saw the marquee for the 13th Warrior, but then when I watched it, I went, holy moly.
I read
And I
this.
was like, they did a better job. That movie's fantastic. It was a good story. And, you know, it does things that I like to do. It brought in different cultures, it brought in different points of view, and they weren't all like, you don't agree with me, so I'm going to kick your butt. It was all like, no, no, yeah, we have this thing. We're going to work together and we're going to learn to respect each other. It was amazing. And that's a good one. You know, the Stand films, I was like, okay. I know Stephen King took a part in some of those and made them better. Certainly, The Shining was, you know, look at the blockbuster that was. And when you read that book, I was like, I wonder what, you know, Mr. King thought about that.
Right.
So, yeah, but by far, I'd rather read a book than see the movie version of it.
And it all comes down to a great story and a storyteller. You mentioned earlier in the conversation that you had a not a great childhood, and I don't want to delve too deeply into that, but I do want to ask you from my own experience growing up in Appalachia. I grew up in a heritage, Lloyd, of storytellers. You know, mountain people are great storytellers.
Yeah.
What is it that you think, if you can be a little introspective, that has made you, and I'll say it so you don't have to, a great storyteller?
Time in that closet, time in that little closet in that little single wide trailer in the middle of this piece of dirt in upstate New York, where that's where I encountered Pony Boy for the first time, right? That's when I encountered Carrie. That's when I had a little the pocket guide to Shakespeare, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna be smart. And as I was like, man, I wonder what he's saying. I didn't give up on that. I started going through it word by word, but then all of those things I'd start going and I didn't have toys, I didn't have like GI Joes or whatever, but
Right.
I'd have a straw and I'd have a sock and a shoe, and I'd be like, okay, the shoe is I'd put it on its end, this is the big cave, and the sock is the worm that's going in
Yeah.
there and I'd make up these stories. But I think just reading and reading and reading and reading things that were well written, that were written by masters of that craft. I think you can, I could sit down and bang out a novel on just anything pretty fast. But to really master the craft, man, that's a lifelong thing. That's a journey worth taking. And it's a journey that I savor.
Did those stories take you away from what wasn't so great in your real world? Did they take?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. First book that made me cry, Charlotte's Web. And when I read that, and I was just like in my closet crying because I'm like, oh, this is just the most horrible, I'm crying over a book. It's not even real. But it took me away from the true horrors that were outside that closet door. Probably a great short story there if I ever had the chonies to pen it, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would read that short story. Maybe we make that a bonus at lloydjeffries.com
Yeah, there we go.
newsletter, and it can wind up in there. Were you a good student when you were a kid?
I was, what always gets me in trouble was asking questions and being a smart ass.
Some
Yeah,
things never change.
yeah, those were the two things. Asking questions would get me in trouble, even if I thought it was a legitimate question. If it didn't meet like sort of their parameters, and I was in trouble. And so that allowed me to develop this sort of sense of sarcasm. And so I was bored a lot in school. And until I joined the military, I enlisted in the military. And when I joined the military, then they showed me, oh no, this is why this is important. And yeah, they were like, hey, it's okay to be a smart ass, but there's a time and place for everything. And then I was like, oh. And then they were like, oh, and by the way, do you want to go into medicine? Here's the path. All you got to do is walk that path. And so suddenly I was like, oh, so I wasn't the greatest student in high school. I did okay. Wasn't like a D student, but I had a ton of detention. But as a college student, I was like, man, if I'm going to spend my time in this class, I'm not walking out with anything short of an A. And that served me well.
And I guess the reason I ask is I wonder if there was someone along the way, despite that tough childhood, that encouraged you and brought you along. Is there a teacher in your background? Is there I don't know, a drill sergeant? Is there somebody that encouraged you and kind of made you take this leap into writing?
There's countless, man. A teacher named Mr. Baniszewski in Erie, Pennsylvania. You know, there was my first supervisor, a guy named Sergeant Ritchie, little muscly Irish guy, taught me a ton. There was a Chief Rick Tennis, Chief Master Sergeant Rick Tennis he taught me how to get it done. And then that's when, the military sent me to school. I was commissioned as an officer. I was able to pay all of that forward. So suddenly I was in charge of a bunch of people. And I said, oh, how do we make these guys successful? And man, it was just storybook. It's a beautiful thing.
Lloyd Jeffries, our guest today. As we wrap up, we've been talking about his Ages of Malice award-winning book series. Portion of Malice is the first one. It won a ton of awards. Measure of Rhyme did great as well. The new book is due any day now. It's called Embers of Shadow. You can find out more at lloydjeffries.com. The books are available at amazon.com. Ask for them by name of bookstores as well. All right, final 30 seconds. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Why should folks check out these Ages of Malice books? They don't know anything about you, don't know anything about the books. What would you tell them?
This story will blow you away. The characters will stick to you like glue. You will see them, you will feel them, you will breathe them, and everything they're going to. It will change the way you think. You want to zoom into books? Zoom into these books because you haven't seen anything like it, and they're amazing.
That's my buddy, Lloyd Jeffries. Thanks for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Burke. It's always great, man.
The Zoom into Book series, partnering with us today at the Big Time Talker podcast. And thank you so much to Headline Books for making that all happen. And thanks to our show sponsor, speakermatch.com. For award-winning author Lloyd Jeffries, visit him at lloydjeffries.com. I'm Burke Allen in our studios here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us today. Now go out and make it a great day. Bye, everybody.